when a homeless kid shouted, "Don't eat that." No one expected what would happen next. The park cafe was a magnet for the city's elite, tucked between rows of manicured trees and the hum of a nearby fountain. It was midday, and the cafe buzzed with life. Waiters in crisp uniforms weaved gracefully between tables, balancing trays of artisan dishes and freshly brewed coffee. The air smelled of warm bread and the faint sweetness of blooming flowers. But for one man, none of this seemed remarkable. At a prime table in the center sat Bernard Green, a name synonymous with power and wealth. He had built his empire from scratch, starting with real estate in his 20s and expanding into ventures that few could dream of. At 72, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who owned not just his world but perhaps the worlds of everyone around him. His sharp suit and gold-rimmed glasses reflected a life of opulence. Yet, as he glanced at the menu, his movements were slow, almost hesitant. Opposite him sat Marissa, his much younger wife, a woman who seemed plucked straight out of a magazine cover. Her jet-black hair framed a face that was impossibly polished. Her bright red lipstick was carefully applied, every inch of her screamed elegance. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She twirled a diamond bracelet on her wrist absent-mindedly, her attention fixed not on her husband but on her phone screen. Nearby, a boy lingered just beyond the patio fence. He was small for his age, his oversized hoodie hanging loosely on his thin frame. His dark eyes darted from table to table, scanning plates and pockets, looking for an opportunity. His name was Malik, though no one in the cafe knew him. His face was familiar on this street, a kid with nowhere to go, always on the outskirts of conversations and the edges of concern. Bernard glanced at his watch. "You're distracted again," he said, his voice calm but pointed. Marissa looked up and smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I'm right here," she replied sweetly, reaching across the table to place her hand on his. "You know how much I enjoy these lunches." Malik's stomach growled. He moved closer, his footsteps almost silent as he leaned against the patio railing. His eyes landed on Bernard's table. It was the kind of meal he hadn't seen up close in months, a pristine white bowl of soup flanked by fresh bread and a glass of sparkling water. But then something unusual happened. As Bernard adjusted his glasses and picked up his phone, Marissa's hand slipped into her designer handbag. Malik saw her fingers close around a small vial. She twisted it open with a casual flick, tilting her hand ever so slightly over the steaming bowl. The liquid blended with the soup in an instant, disappearing like it had never been there. Malik's breath caught. He froze, watching her stir the soup with the spoon, her expression unchanged. Then she leaned closer to Bernard, her voice low but just audible enough. "After all the trouble I've gone through, you won't ruin this now." The boy blinked, unsure of what he had just witnessed. Was this real? Could a woman who looked so perfect, sitting in a place so polished, really be doing what he thought? But Malik couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Malik's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched lower behind the railing. He wasn't sure what he'd just seen, but the way the woman's voice carried those cold words, it sent a shiver through him. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. No one else had noticed. No one else had been paying attention. It was just him. The faint growl in his stomach pulled him back to reality, but his eyes remained fixed on the couple. Bernard looked tired, distracted, his spoon hovering over the bowl as he checked his phone. Marissa was all charm and poise again, her smile bright, her hand resting on her chin, as if she hadn't just whispered something chilling moments ago. Malik could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His instinct screamed to walk away. Why get involved? Who would believe a kid like him, a boy in a threadbare hoodie standing at the edges of a world he wasn't welcome in? He swallowed hard, glancing around at the other patrons, laughter, chatter, the clinking of glasses. No one cared. No one even noticed him. But his gaze returned to Bernard's spoon, now dipping into the soup. Malik felt his chest tighten. It wasn't just his imagination. He had seen her pour something into it. He knew what would happen if the old man took a bite. His thoughts raced. He didn't know this man, but that didn't matter. Wrong was wrong. The moment stretched endlessly. And then, without thinking, he pushed himself off the railing and marched straight to the table. His legs felt like lead, but his feet didn't stop. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Don't eat that!" Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clatter of a dropped fork echoed across the cafe. Bernard froze, his spoon inches from his lips, his wide eyes locking onto the boy. Marissa whipped her head around, her expression hardening. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut through glass. Malik didn't falter. His voice was shaky but loud enough for everyone to hear. "She put something in your food. I saw her. Don't eat it." Gasps rippled through the cafe as every patron turned toward the scene. The silence that followed was suffocating. Malik stood his ground, his chest heaving as adrenaline surged through him. Bernard blinked, glancing between the boy and his wife. "What is he talking about, Marissa?" His tone was calm, but his hand trembled as he set the spoon down on the table. Marissa's composure snapped like a rubber band stretched too thin. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "You little liar!" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "How dare you accuse me of something so vile? Who even let you in here?" The words stung, but Malik didn't back down. His eyes remained locked on Bernard's, desperate to make him see the truth. "I saw her. She poured something into your soup when you weren't looking," he said, his voice steadying as he spoke. "You can smell it, if you don't believe me." Bernard's face paled as he turned toward his wife, his eyes narrowing. "Marissa, what's going on?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. She scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "He's just trying to cause trouble. Look at him, he probably just wants money or food." She spat the words out like they were poison themselves, her gaze flicking to Malik with open disdain. But the boy didn't waver. He stepped closer to the table, his fists clenched. "I'm not lying," he said firmly, his voice rising. "She doesn't want you to know, but I saw everything." Bernard's hand lingered over the bowl, torn between disbelief and the gnawing doubt creeping into his mind. But something in the boy's tone made him hesitate. The air around the table seemed to thicken. The once lively cafe was now eerily silent, all eyes locked on the unfolding drama, their meals forgotten. Bernard leaned back slightly in his chair, studying the boy with a scrutinizing gaze. His face bore the marks of a man used to people playing games with him, trying to take advantage of his wealth. But this felt different. The boy didn't flinch. Didn't look away. "Malik, is it?" Bernard asked, his voice steady, though a trace of suspicion lingered. The boy nodded. "Yes. I'm telling the truth. Please don't eat it," he said, his voice soft but insistent. Marissa let out a harsh laugh, crossing her arms as she stared Malik down. "This is absurd," she snapped, her tone icy. "He's just some street kid looking for attention. Are you really going to entertain this nonsense, Bernard?" But Bernard didn't answer her. Instead, he picked up the spoon again, this time holding it closer to his face. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the quiet storm brewing within him. "Marissa," he said slowly, his eyes meeting hers. "You heard him. What exactly is going on here?" Marissa's mask of poise cracked further, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I can't believe you're even asking me that. It's insulting." She turned to the growing crowd, her voice rising. "He's lying. Look at him, he probably doesn't even know who you are. Why would you trust him over me?" The weight of her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the effect she'd hoped for. The crowd was murmuring now, their eyes darting between the three of them. Whispers floated through the air. "Did she really do it? Look at her, she seems nervous. That boy doesn't look like he's making this up." The murmurs only fueled Marissa's fury. She slammed her hands on the table, her polished demeanor gone. "Enough of this, Bernard! Eat your damn soup and let's go," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. But Malik wasn't backing down. He took another step forward, his fists clenched tightly. "If you won't believe me, then call someone to test it," he said, his voice rising with urgency. "You're rich, you've got lawyers, doctors, people who can figure it out. But don't eat it. If you do, you'll regret." Bernard's jaw tightened as he turned back to the bowl. The spoon was still in his hand, but he didn't lift it to his lips. His eyes, tired and calculating, shifted to his wife. "Marissa," he said, his voice low, "you've been acting strange for weeks now. This?" Her face flushed. She stumbled over her words. I don't know what you're talking about." "You can't seriously think I'd poison me," Bernard finished for her, his tone razor sharp. The crowd gasped audibly, their whispers growing louder. Malik stood firm, his gaze unwavering. He could feel his heart pounding, but he wouldn't let it show. He'd done what he could. Now it was up to Bernard to make the next move. Marissa straightened, her expression hardening into something cold and unfamiliar. "This is ridiculous. I don't have to sit here and listen to this nonsense," she said, grabbing her handbag. But before she could leave, Bernard's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength for a man his age. "You're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "Not until we get to the bottom of this." The waiter, who had been frozen in place, finally spoke. "Sir, should I call the police?" The question sent a ripple through the café. For the first time, Marissa looked genuinely panicked. She shook her head violently. "Don't you dare! This is just a misunderstanding." "Bernard, you can't seriously." But Bernard raised his hand, silencing her. "Yes," he said, addressing the waiter without looking away from Marissa. "Call them." Malik felt a surge of relief, but it was fleeting. The truth wasn't out yet, and the tension was far from over. The cafe held its collective breath as the waiter hurried inside to make the call. Bernard let go of Marissa's wrist, his eyes never leaving hers. The once polished charm she wore so effortlessly was now unraveling, replaced by a growing sense of desperation. She glanced around, her lips moving but no sound coming out, as though searching for an escape. Meanwhile, Malik stood a few steps back, his hands shaking slightly. He'd done all he could, but now doubt crept in. What if the man didn't believe him after all? What if she managed to twist her way out of this? He clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay rooted in place. "Malik," Bernard said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. "You said you saw her put something in the soup. Can you describe it?" The boy nodded quickly, stepping forward. "It was a small bottle, like one you'd use for medicine. Clear liquid. She poured it in when you were looking at your phone, then stirred it. I swear I saw it." Bernard's face tightened. He turned to Marissa, who was already shaking her head. "This is absurd. He's lying. Why would I?" But Bernard cut her off. "Why would he lie? What could he possibly gain from this?" The crowd murmured again, and the sound of sirens in the distance added to the charged atmosphere. Marissa's eyes darted toward the soup, and for a split second, her carefully crafted facade slipped completely. She looked cornered. Then, as if grasping at straws, she rounded on Malik. "You've been spying on us, haven't you? Trying to cause trouble because you're jealous of people who actually have something." The words hit Malik like a slap, but he stood his ground. "I'm not jealous," he said firmly. "I saw what I saw. And I couldn't just stand there and let you hurt him." The sirens grew louder, and soon 2 police officers entered the cafe. The room seemed to shrink as they approached the table, their hands resting on their belts. "What's going on here?" one of them asked, his tone neutral but authoritative. Bernard stood, his towering frame still commanding respect despite his age. "Officers, I need you to take a look at this," he said, gesturing toward the bowl of soup. "This boy claims my wife poisoned it." The officers exchanged glances, their expressions carefully blank. One of them leaned down, sniffing the bowl cautiously, then turned to Marissa. "Ma'am, do you have anything to say about this?" Her face turned crimson. "This is ridiculous," He's just a street kid trying to make trouble. Bernard, you're really going to let this nonsense go this far? But the officer wasn't buying her deflection. We'll need to test the contents, he said, reaching for the bowl. No! Marissa snapped, her voice rising. The outburst drew even more attention. Her sudden panic only made her look guiltier. The officer paused, narrowing his eyes. Ma'am, he said slowly, is there something you'd like to tell us before we proceed? Marissa hesitated. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. She looked at Bernard, then at the officers. Her hands trembled as she clutched her handbag. Finally, her resolve. Fine. She spat, her voice low but dripping with venom. You want the truth? I'm tired of living in his shadow. Tired of his control over everything. He was never supposed to make it past this year and I. She stopped abruptly, realizing too late that she'd said too much. The cafe erupted in gasps, some patrons pulling out their phones to record the scene. Bernard's face went pale as the weight of her confession hit him like a truck. The officer stepped forward, his expression grim. Ma'am, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder. Please put your hands where I can see them. Marissa's composure shattered completely. She screamed, trying to wriggle free as they secured her hands behind her back. You don't understand. I deserved everything. He had everything, she shouted as they led her away, her voice echoing through the stunned cafe. Bernard sank back into his chair, his hand trembling as he pushed the soup away. For a moment he said nothing, his face a mask of disbelief and betrayal. Then his eyes found Malik, who stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. But Bernard's gaze softened. A flicker of gratitude replaced the earlier storm. Malik hadn't just saved his life, he'd revealed a truth Bernard would have never seen coming. The cafe slowly returned to a low hum of whispers and murmurs as the officers escorted Marissa out, her protests fading into the distance. Patrons exchanged wide-eyed glances, still reeling from what they had just witnessed. Some looked at Bernard with pity, others with curiosity. But Malik didn't move. He stood rooted to the spot, unsure if he was supposed to stay, or slip away quietly. Bernard turned to the boy, his face still pale but his eyes now steady. Malik, he said softly, gesturing to the seat across from him. Sit. Malik hesitated, glancing around at the onlookers, but Bernard's voice carried a weight that made him obey. Slowly, he sank into the chair, his shoulders tense. You saved my life, Bernard said, his voice low but firm. I don't know how I can ever repay you. Malik fidgeted, his hands gripping the edge of the table. I couldn't let it happen, he said quietly. I couldn't just watch and say nothing. Bernard nodded, his gaze distant for a moment, as if replaying the entire ordeal in his mind. Most people would have, he said after a pause. They would have turned the other way. Pretended they didn't see. But you didn't. That took courage, boy. Malik shrugged, his voice barely above a whisper. I guess I don't like seeing people get hurt. That's all. Bernard leaned back, studying the boy. For the first time, he seemed to really see him, not just as a scrappy kid on the streets, but as someone with a story. A soul. How long have you been out here? The question caught Malik off guard. He looked away, his voice tinged with embarrassment. A while. Bernard frowned but didn't press. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. Wait here, he said, standing and stepping aside to make a call. Malik watched him, unsure of what to do. His heart pounded with anxiety. Was he in trouble now? Was Bernard going to call someone to have him removed? But when Bernard returned, his expression was calm, almost kind. Help is on the way, he said simply. Help? Malik asked, brow furrowed. Bernard nodded. I called someone I trust. They'll make sure you have a place to sleep tonight, somewhere safe. And if you'll let me, I'd like to do more than that. The boy's eyes widened. You don't have to do that, he said quickly, his voice defensive. I didn't do this for money or anything. Bernard smiled faintly. I know. That's why I want to help. You did something most people wouldn't have. And trust me, Malik, if the world had more people like you, it would be a much better place. For the first time in a long while, Malik felt a warmth he couldn't quite describe. He looked down, unsure of what to say. The cafe patrons began to disperse, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air. Bernard picked up his glass of water, taking a long sip before speaking again. Sometimes life gives us the chance to change someone else's story, he said, his voice thoughtful. You changed mine today, Malik. And maybe, just maybe, I can help change yours. The boy glanced up at him, his dark eyes glistening with something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years: hope. As the two sat in silence, the sun continued its arc across the sky, casting long shadows across the cafe. The lesson wasn't lost on anyone who had witnessed the event. Courage doesn't always wear a suit. Kindness doesn't always come from the wealthy. Sometimes it's the people we overlook who carry the greatest strength of all. In the end, Malik's bravery didn't just save a life, it reminded everyone in that cafe of the power of standing up for what's right, no matter the odds.